I want to continue in volume 12, taking up at January the 25th, 1919. And it says that the divine will is light, and one who lives in it becomes light. Now, this is the transformation that has to happen inside of us, that we actually become like God. And God is light, and God is love. So Luisa says, having spent most bitter days of privation of my sweet Jesus, of my life, of my all, my poor heart could take no more. And I was saying to myself, what a hard lot is reserved for me. After so many promises, he has left me. Now, this is the usual crisis that she goes into in his absence. So she says, where is his love now? Who knows whether I myself have not been the cause of his abandonment, rendering myself unworthy of him? Oh, maybe it was that night when he wanted to speak about the troubles of the world, and he started saying that the heart of man was still bloodthirsty, and that the battles are not finished because the thirst for blood is not yet extinguished in the heart of man. So here Luisa is finding a reason why she could blame herself for the fact that she's having this deprivation from the Lord, and yet she has had endless explanations from him that this is not the reason. But she's showing us what we're actually like, that we're much more likely to say that we are the cause of what is happening to us than the actual reason that the Lord explains. So she goes around this roundabout quite frequently. And so she said to him, Jesus, you always want to talk about these troubles. Let's leave them aside. Let's talk about something else. And he, afflicted, remained silent. Maybe he was offended, she said. But she said, forgive me, I won't do it anymore. So long as you come. That's the whole issue as far as Luisa is concerned. So while I was saying this and other nonsense, she's right to call it nonsense, I felt myself lose consciousness. So she goes into ecstasy. The Lord is there. She just won't acknowledge that he wants to be there in the way that he chooses, not the way she chooses. And I saw my sweet Jesus inside of me. Of course, that's Luke 17:21, the kingdom of God is within you. And 1 Corinthians 3:16, know you not that you are the temple of the living God and that the Spirit of God dwells in you. But she saw Jesus alone and taciturn, walking from one point of my interior to another, and as though he would stumble at one point and bump into another. I was all confused, she said, and did not dare to tell him anything. But I thought, who knows how many sins there is that makes Jesus bump into? But he, all goodness, looked at me, and though he seemed tired and was dripping with sweat, he told me. This is very important. My daughter, he said, poor martyr, not of faith, but of love, and not of human love, but of divine love. You are a divine martyr, because everything she does is done in the divine will, therefore it's at the divine level. And she finds this difficult to grasp, as any of us would. You're a divine martyr because your most cruel martyrdom is my privation, which places on you the seal of a divine martyr. Why do you fear and doubt about my love? And besides, how could I leave you? I dwell in you as within my own humanity. So I want to give you 1 Corinthians 6:16 there, and John 14:20-21. You in me and I in you. I dwell in you as within my humanity. And just as I enclose the entire world in my humanity, so do I enclose it in you. So Jesus encloses the entire world in Luisa. And there she is complaining as if there's something wrong. Did you not see that while I was walking, I bumped and then I stumbled? Those were the sins, the evil soul and evil souls that I encountered. what pain for my heart. It is from within you, he said, that I allot the destiny of the world. Now that needs to be underlined and coloured. That if a person is truly living in the divine will, then that person's soul is the throne of God on earth, and it is from there that he reigns. It is your humanity that shelters me. Of course, she's a living host as well, isn't she? Just as mine did for my divinity. If my divinity did not have my humanity to give it shelter, the poor creatures would have had no escape either in time or in eternity. We would have had to take the full consequences of divine justice. So for that, I want to give you Revelation 6:16 to 17. And divine justice would no longer look at the creature as its own. In other words, deserving preservation, but as an enemy deserving destruction. Now, since the resurrection, my humanity is glorious. And so another humanity is needed that may grieve and suffer and share my pains with me, and that will love souls together with me and lay down its life in order to save them. So I want to give you Colossians 1:24 and Galatians 6:17. So Jesus is saying, now that Luisa is living in the divine will and she is his throne on earth, then, and she's a living host as well, well, he's looking for somebody else to live his life on the earth. So that person would have to grieve, suffer, and share the pains with Jesus. And so he said to her, and this person would have to be ready to lay down its life in order to save them. He said, this is necessary for me. In other words, Christ must be on earth as well as in heaven. And he said, I have chosen you. With all her complaints and all the rest of it, she is the chosen one. Aren't you happy? Therefore, he said, because I've chosen you, I want to tell you everything, my pains, the chastisements that creatures deserve, so that you may take part in everything, and from one single thing with me, in other words, from being completely at one with me in the divine will. And this is also why I want you in the height of my will. That means in the summit of this experience. In other words, he wants her in the greatest possible position of union with him. Someone who has gone into the deepest depths of the divine will that is actually possible for a creature. This is amazing stuff. You would become one with me, one single thing. And this is also why I want you in the height or in the summit of my will, so that wherever you cannot reach with your will as a creature, with mine you will reach everything, and everything that befits the office of my humanity. In other words, Jesus wants another Jesus on the earth. Therefore, fear no more, and do not afflict me with your pains, with your fears, that I may abandon you. I get enough of these from others, he says, please don't add to it. Do you want to increase my pain with yours? No. Be sure your Jesus will not leave you. When he says be sure, he's saying be certain. And this is truth itself speaking. That's John 14:6. I am the way, the truth, and the life. And I also want to give you Joshua 1:5. I will never leave you or desert you. Jesus can't leave Luisa at this point because the two of them are one. And how can you separate one? You can't. Afterwards, Jesus came back, showing himself crucified, and he transformed Luisa into himself and also into his pains. And he added, my daughter, my will is light. So I want to give you 2 Timothy 6:16. God lives in unapproachable light. I want to give you 1 John 1:5. God is light. Okay? My will is light, he said. And one who lives out of the divine will actually becomes light. So I want to give you Psalm 104 verse 2. Lord, you are robed in majesty. You are dressed in a robe of light. Jesus was seen transformed into light on Mount Tabor as well. So one who lives out of the divine will becomes light. That's what we have to be transformed from, this heavy weight of flesh into the light weight, or the truly spiritual condition of light. And as light, she easily enters into my most pure light, because light can mix with light. And she has the key. Now, this is the key of divine will. She has the key to open and to take whatever she wants. But in order to be able to open, a key must be without rust or mud. It has to be operational. And the key itself must be of iron, otherwise the key can't open. So you're looking at something very strong and very reliable in the iron. In the same way, the soul, to be able to open with the key of my will, must not mix the rust of her own will with it. There's the warning for us. Nor must she mix even a shadow of the mud of earthly things. So we have to take on board that anyone who wants to live in the divine will has to live a very high level of spirituality, very high. We are the eagles of Scripture. And as eagles, we must fly at the very top of the mountains. Only in this way can we combine together, Jesus says, light mixing with light, but light won't mix with mud. So again, I want to give you Hebrews 12:14. Nothing unholy or unworthy can enter the presence of God. Okay. Only in this way can we combine together. And she, the soul, can make whatever she wants of me. There you have an absolutely extraordinary humility and vulnerability of the divine love. And I can do whatever I want with her. In other words, this is total surrender of each to the other. In other words, it's perfect marriage. Each completely given to the other. One of the very holy women who founded a religious order said that the surrendered soul had found paradise on earth. The surrendered soul is the eagle flying very high. So after this, Luisa said, I saw my human mother and a late confessor of mine. Of course, she's now talking about people who have gone on in death to the other dimension. So she said, I wanted to tell them about my state, and they said to me, now here is the Lord allowing souls on the other side communicate with Luisa. In these days, you have run the risk that the Lord would suspend you completely from the state of victim. And we, the whole of purgatory and heaven, now you know where the priest and the mother are. Okay, both of them are in purgatory, allowed to speak to her. The whole of purgatory and heaven have prayed very much, and how much we did so that the Lord would not suspend you. In other words, the members of the church suffering and the church triumphant are much more aware than Luisa is of the enormity of the office that's been given to her. From this you can understand how justice is still full of grave chastisements. Therefore have patience and do not get tired. So January the 27th, 1919, the 3 mortal wounds of the heart of Jesus. Luisa said she was in her usual state, and when Jesus came, she could see his adorable heart all full of wounds in which there were rivers of blood rushing out. And he said, "My daughter, among the many wounds that my heart contains, there are 3 wounds which give me mortal pains and such bitterness of sorrow as to surpass all the other wounds together. These are the pains of my loving souls." There's the shock. Number 1. When I see a soul all mine, suffering because of me, this is Luisa, tortured, trampled upon, ready to suffer even the most painful death for me, I feel her pains as if they were my own. Luisa speaks as if Jesus doesn't really know what she's going through, and she wants to tell him what she's going through. And she hasn't grasped that Jesus is actually experiencing the same pain as her, because he's one with her. The two of them are inseparable in the divine will. I feel her pains as if they were my own, maybe even more. Love knows how to open deeper gashes to the extent of making one not feel the other pains. That is outside of this. In other words, all the other pains don't match to the depth of this pain. First, into this first wound, he said, enters my dear mother as number 1. How her heart, pierced because of my pains, overflowed into mine and felt vividly all its piercings. And in seeing her dying, yet not dying because of my death, I felt the torment, the harshness of her martyrdom in my heart. And I felt the pains of my death, which the heart of my mother felt. And my heart died together with hers. So all my pains united together before the pains of my mother surpassed everything. It was right that my celestial mother have the first place in my heart, both in sorrow and in love. And that's perfectly obvious when you do the hours of the Passion and realize that Blessed Mother was with Jesus all the way, even though she was not physically present for most of it. She only appeared at the beginning and at the cross, but she was there all the time. So it was right that my celestial mother would have the first place in my heart, both in sorrow and in love, because each pain suffered for love of me opened seas of graces and of love, which poured into her pierced heart. So mare in Latin is sea, Maria is Mary, and the seas of grace and love were poured into her in abundance. Into this wound also enter all the souls who suffer because of me and out of pure love. So this would include Luisa and other victim souls who offer themselves to the Lord. You yourself enter into it, Jesus said. And even if all offended me and no one loved me, I would find in you the love which would compensate me for all, because he's being loved in a divine manner. Therefore, when souls cast me away and force me to run away from them, very quickly I come to take refuge in you, as in my hiding place. Now, Psalm 32 verse 7 says, Lord, you are a hiding place for me. And he is saying that we are a hiding place for him, also if we are living in the divine will on earth. I come to take refuge in you as in my hiding place. And finding my own love, not theirs, and suffering only for me, I say, I do not regret having created the heavens and the earth, and having suffered so much. A soul who loves me and who suffers for me is all my contentment, my happiness, my reward, and for everything I have done. So first of all, I want to give you Psalm 119, verse 114. I want to give you Genesis 6, verses 5 to 8, where we're told that the Lord did regret having made man because there was nothing on the earth but sin and wickedness. So if infinite love and infinite grace and beauty and purity and wisdom and everything else that is God could only see the exact opposite on the earth, you would certainly understand that he would regret it. So if you ask the question, what did God get out of creating and redeeming us? It's a very good question, you know. He has given absolutely everything that he is to us. He's poured out all his graces. He has poured out all his beauty, his love, his attributes, everything. What did he get out of it? And he says that a soul who loves me and who suffers for me is all my contentment, my happiness, and my reward for everything I have done. Love can be repaid by love alone. St. John of the Cross tells us that. And so it's by loving Jesus in the divine will and therefore loving him infinitely, because divinely, that is how we can actually reward him for what he has done. And so if we make reparation in the divine will on the divine level, then we're making proper reparation for all that has gone wrong. And Jesus continues, as though putting all the rest aside, I delight in her and I play with her. Now, most people that I know do not have a concept of God playing with anybody. And yet if you go to Proverbs 8:31, you're told that God is at play everywhere in the world, delighting to be with the children of men. So it's a wonderful image of a very playful daddy wanting to be with the children and enjoy them. However, Jesus said, this wound of love in my heart, while it is the most painful, such as to surpass everything, it contains two effects at the same time. It gives me intense pain and highest joy. Now, if you go back over the last 11 volumes, as Luisa enters more and more and more deeply into the passion of Jesus, experiencing the passion, but experiencing it only out of love, she says that she has experienced intense pain, but also intense joy. I think Luisa and the other saints would also claim that in spite of everything, Jesus would have experienced intense joy on the cross in the midst of his intense torture. And that joy was not a felt thing in his body, but the reality in his soul that no matter what he was experiencing, the result was going to be that redemption was going to be available for everybody. In other words, it was worth it. He was paying a very high price, but it was worth it. So he says to Luisa that this pain that he experiences gives him intense pain and also the highest joy. It gives unspeakable bitterness and indescribable sweetness, painful death and glorious life. What a wonderful way to describe Jesus' death and resurrection. These are the excesses of my love, which are inconceivable to the human mind. No matter how much we think about it and pray about it and contemplate it, we still don't get it. They are inconceivable to the human mind, the created mind. And in fact, how many contentments did my heart not find in the sorrows of my pierced mother? Does that mean that the Lord rejoiced in her sorrow? No, he rejoiced in the fact that she was participating with him in paying the maximum price for the redemption of the human race. So Jesus said that the second mortal wound of his heart is ingratitude. Now, if you've read any of Luisa at all, you will realize that Jesus identifies the human race as the ungrateful ones. If you're long enough on the planet yourself, you will realize that is a very apt way of describing human beings. Everything is their right according to them, and people don't even say thank you or sorry anymore. Because if you're absolutely convinced that you have the right to everything, why should you thank anybody? And so humility goes out the door then. So the second mortal wound of my heart, Jesus said, is ingratitude. With ingratitude, the soul closes my heart. If you just think of ourselves, and just take children in a family, just to take one example, if they're completely ungrateful to their parents, does that stimulate the parents to sacrifice more and more for them? No way. It stops it. If you do work to help people and they show absolutely no gratitude whatsoever, does it enable you to persevere? No, it doesn't. It closes your heart. And Jesus says that our ingratitude for all that he's given to him closes his heart to us as well. It's our own fault. That statement that we make about each other is true. We say that person is his own worst enemy. Each one of us is our own worst enemy. And one of the things that we in the divine will must do is make reparation for the ingratitude of the human race to the Lord. With ingratitude, the soul closes my heart. Even more, she herself turns the key with double locks. Oh dear. Ephesians 5:20. And my heart swells because it wants to pour graces and love, but it cannot. And it cannot because the soul has closed it and has put on it the seal of her ingratitude. And I become delirious, I agonize without hope that this wound may be healed, because ingratitude keeps embittering it more and more, giving me mortal pain. So there is one of the major blocks to reaching union with God. Ingratitude. Make sure you thank the Lord for absolutely everything. The third wound is the key to hell. The third one is obstinacy. The scripture also calls that hardness of heart. And if you go to the book of Exodus, the Pharaoh of the Exodus is the perfect example of hardness of heart. No matter what God said or did, he just wouldn't budge. I also want to give you Isaiah 48, verse 4, and Deuteronomy 2:30. The third wound is obstinacy. What mortal wound for my heart, Jesus said. Obstinacy is the destruction of all the goods that I have done for the soul. It is the signature of declaration that the soul places that she no longer recognizes me and that she no longer belongs to me. Oh dear. In other words, this hardness of heart cuts us out of the kingdom of God. It is the key of hell into which the soul goes to hurl herself. My heart feels the tearing of it. It is torn to pieces, and I feel one of those pieces being taken away from me. What a mortal wound obstinacy is. Now, if you go to the hours of the Passion and the description of the scourging of Jesus, Luisa explains that the pieces of his flesh that actually fell to the ground represented the souls that were lost. That's a frightening thing. So Jesus feels himself being torn to pieces as parts of his own body are actually torn from him. What a mortal wound obstinacy is. My daughter, he said, enter into my heart and take part in these wounds of mine. Sympathize with my tormented heart. Let us suffer together and Let us pray. So Luisa said that she entered into his heart, and how painful but beautiful it was to suffer and pray with Jesus. We now come to January the 29th, 1919, and we get an absolutely extraordinary message from Jesus explaining how God renews humanity every 2,000 years. And so you were given here the history of the divine will. I was doing the adoration to the wounds of blessed Jesus, and at the end, she said, I recited the creed, intending to enter into the immensity of the divine will, in which are all the acts of creatures past, present, and future, and even those acts that the creature should do, and because of negligence or wickedness, they don't do. Now, I want you to notice the intention. It is extremely important that we tell the Lord what our intention is. And it's also equally important to tell him our motivation. In other words, I'm doing this for love of you alone. I'm not doing it for any other reason. And most particularly, I'm not doing it to try and grow in sanctity myself. In the divine will, you leave that aside. You're only interested in the glory of God and the salvation of souls. You've gone beyond looking to your own sanctity. If you're interested in your own sanctity, go back to an earlier spirituality, but you're not in divine will. So Luisa recited the creed with the intention that she could reach all the acts that human beings did and should have done and could have done if they wanted. And she said, my Jesus, my love, I enter into your volition. That means we fuse. And with this creed, I intend to redo, repair, all the acts of faith which souls have not done, all the disbelief and the adoration which is due to God, our Creator. So she wants to make reparation for all the unbelief and she wants to repair and redo acts that should have been done in reciting the creed. In other words, some people just say the creed because that's what you say. But it doesn't actually mean anything. For example, people stand up in church and they say, I believe in God. He is my Father. He is almighty. He's the creator of heaven and earth. And they go home and they worry themselves to death. And they don't seem to realize that the statement they made in church and the action they do at home are complete contradictions. Because if God really is my Father and he really is almighty and he really is the omnipotent creator of heaven and earth, what have I to worry about? Nothing. It's like a child whose father is a multimillionaire. Would they worry about money? Of course not. It's just that spiritually we can be very contradictory. So, while she was saying these and other things, Luisa said, she felt her intelligence being dissolved in the divine will. Now, I think this is beyond brilliant. It doesn't really matter whether you have university degrees or not when you're in the divine will. The Lord will infuse knowledge into you, as he did to Luisa and other saints. I felt my intelligence being dissolved in the divine will, she said, and a light investing my intellect. Now that light is the divine will, 1 John 1:5 and 2 Timothy 6:16. A light investing my intellect, inside of which I could see my sweet Jesus. Now, I want to give you John 8:12 for that, because he said he was the light of the world. And this light spoke and spoke, we would say communicated. But who can say everything? I will say it confusedly, she said. And besides, I feel such repugnance that if obedience was not so strict, but more indulgent, it would not force me to make such sacrifices. But you, my life, give me strength and do not leave the poor, little, ignorant one on her own. Now, I've said that slowly because no matter what gifts God gives to us, no matter what grace he pours into it, we remain nothing. And we have to remain in our nothingness, and we have to remain consciously in our nothingness. It's the only safe place to be. And so Luisa never lets go of the reality she knows of herself, that of herself she's a poor thing. She's a little thing, and she's an ignorant thing. She hasn't any education at all. But we're all poor, little, and ignorant on all levels, but unfortunately, if we have a bit of education, we think otherwise. And then she makes an effort to say what Jesus was communicating to her in this divine light, in this infused knowledge. So he said, "My beloved daughter, I want to make known to you the order of my providence. It is extremely important for all of us who are trying to live in the divine will to live within God's order, to live within his order in every way. Every course of 2,000 years, he said, I have renewed the world. In the first 2,000 years, I renewed it by the flood." You'll get that in Genesis 6 to 10, chapters 6 to 10. In the second 2,000, I renewed it with my coming on the earth, that's the 4 Gospels, in which I manifested my humanity, from which, as though from many fissures, my divinity shone forth. Now, the Gospels tell us some of the moments when Jesus' divinity really shone forth, like the night he walked on water and said, "Ego eimi, it is I." And the day he was transformed on Mount Tabor, when the privileged 3 saw him transformed into light. These were fissures or openings through which his divinity showed forth. And the good people and the very saints of the past 2,000 years have lived from the fruits of my humanity. In other words, the church has fed on the fruits of the incarnation for the past 2,000 years. And in drops, they've enjoyed my divinity because they had not been given the revelation of how to live at the divine level. Now we are at the turn of the third 2,000 years, and there will be a third renewal. This is the reason for the general confusion everywhere. It's nothing other than the preparation for the third renewal. And if in the second renewal I manifested what my humanity did and suffered, and very little of what the divinity was doing, now in the third renewal, after the earth has been purged and the current generation destroyed, now he's talking about, it's 1919, so he's talking about the interim between the First and the Second World Wars. I think that if you go to the book of Revelation and you are shown very clearly between chapter 6 and 10, and then in chapter 16, 3 massive waves of purification. I think that's the First World War, the Second World War, and the Third World War, which is still to break out upon us. So after the earth has been purged and the current generation destroyed for the most part, I will be even more generous with creatures, and I will accomplish the renewal by manifesting what my divinity did within my humanity. So that's what he's doing with Luisa. During one of those waves of chastisement, the second one, the Second World War. Sorry, this is in between the First and the Second World War. So what he's doing here is he's revealing this way ahead of time so that when the church needed this food, it would find it there. If you go back to the journey of the people of Israel through the desert at the time of Moses, they didn't find the manna until they needed it. They didn't find the quails until they needed them. and they didn't find the living water from the rock until they needed it. Nor did Moses raise up the bronze serpent for them until they needed it. The Lord has the solution for us before we know we have the problem. That's why we should trust him beyond reason. Now, he said, in this third renewal, after the earth has been purged and the current generation destroyed for the most part, I will be even more generous with creatures, and I will accomplish the renewal by manifesting what my divinity did within my humanity. How my divine will acted with my human will. How everything remained linked with me. How I did and redid everything. That's the divine version that he made of everyone. And even every thought of each creature was redone by me. And it was sealed with my divine volition. My love wants its outpouring and wants to make known the excesses of my divinity, which my divinity operated in my humanity for the good of souls, which surpass by far the excesses that my humanity operated externally. So, in the revelation about the divine will, Jesus is showing us all that was locked up inside of his humanity, if I can use those words, and was not manifested at the time that he was on the earth in the incarnation, but is being manifested fully now that the church 2,000 years later is more mature and has suffered and grown somewhat. This is also why I often speak to you about the living in my will, which I've not manifested to anybody until now. That's as clear as daylight. So none of the saints beforehand could have lived out of the divine will when it wasn't even revealed to them. They lived out of the humanity of Jesus, through him, with him, and in him, as the church tells us. At the most, they have known the shadow of my will, the grace, the sweetness that doing it contains. But to operate inside of it by fusing oneself with the divine will, to embrace immensity, to multiply oneself with me and penetrate everywhere, even while being on the earth, both in heaven, into heaven, and into the hearts of all. To lay down the human ways and to act with divine ways, that was not known. That is the immense privilege that's given to you and me. So much so that not to a few it will appear strange. And those who do not keep their minds open to the light of truth will not understand a thing. And I'm sure all of us have the similar experience of trying to talk about the divine will to people that you would imagine would be more than ready and more than delighted to receive it, to find the door closed. But those who do not keep their minds open, you see, we can decide that a certain thing is it and we're not receiving anything else, and so we close our minds to it. And you know that if a human being closes their minds to you, you get no quarter. And if they close their minds to evidence, you get no quarter. This is witnessed every day in the courts, where a person who is accused can close their minds completely to all the evidence that's presented to them and still say they're innocent, when it can be proven publicly that they're guilty. It's because they've closed their minds to the truth. Whereas if they had opened their minds to the truth, they would have opened their minds to repentance and recovery, instead of a long jail sentence. Those who do not keep their minds open to the light of truth will not understand anything. But I, little by little, will make my way, manifesting first one truth and then another about this living in my will, so that they will end up, they meaning the human race, they meaning the church, will in the end understand it. Look at the patience of the Lord. It's divine patience. Humans don't have patience, do they? So Jesus continues, now, he said, the first link which connected the true living in my will was my humanity. So we start at this point in revealing the divine will. My humanity identified with my divinity and swam in the eternal volition and kept tracing all the acts of creatures in order to make them its own and to give to the Father a divine glory on the part of creatures. Let's stop there for 1 second. Jesus has given the Father divine glory for me. He's given him divine reparation for me. He has given him divine gratitude for me. And so on. Now it is time for me to join him in the divine will and put my fiat beside his, so that I thank the Father with a divine thanksgiving, and I glorify him with a divine glory, that I love him with a divine love, and then what Jesus did for me has been worth it. Jesus said, I gave to the Father a divine glory on the part of creatures, and I brought to all the acts of creatures the value, the love, and the kiss of the divine volition. In this sphere of the eternal volition, I could see all the acts of souls that could possibly be done and were not done, and the very good acts that were done badly. And I did those, he said, which were not done, and redid those who were done badly. Now these acts not done, and done only by me, are all suspended in my will, and I await others to come to live in my volition and repeat in my will that which I did. This is why, he said, I chose you, Luisa, as the second link in connection with my humanity, forming one single link with mine, living in my volition, repeating my own acts. And we've been watching Luisa do that for many volumes. Otherwise, on this side, my love would remain without outpouring. This side is the earth, heaven is the other side. So on the earth side, my love would remain without outpouring, without glory on the part of creatures for what my divinity operated in my humanity, and without the perfect purpose of creation, which must be enclosed and perfected in my will. Now notice, the purpose of creation must be enclosed and perfected in my will. So I want to give you Romans 8:19 there, that even the whole of creation is crying out for the sons of God who will do this, so that all of creation can recover as well from the disaster of the fall of the human race. It would be as if I had shed all my blood, suffered so much, and no one had known it. Who would have loved me? What heart would be shaken? No one. And therefore, in no one would I have had my fruits and the glory of redemption. That's Galatians 5:20 for the fruits of the Spirit that are produced in us. So Luisa interrupted Jesus and said, my love, if there's so much good about this living in the divine will, why didn't you manifest it before now? She cannot see, and it is difficult for us to see, that the divine order is perfect like God himself. And it's infinite, and its beauty is beyond imagining. And if you have a very beautiful picture that's been painted by a great artist, and there's a tiny little bit of it not right, it just spoils the whole thing. Everyone knows that the painter looks at his painting, his or her painting, and goes back and touches it up and says, no, I think we need something slightly differently there. And we often encounter Jesus working in Luisa's soul, and she says to him, what are you doing? He says, I'm touching it up. There's the divine artist. And so I want to give you Ephesians 2:10, that we are God's work of art, okay, created in Christ Jesus. So Luisa wants to know, why didn't you do it before? He said, my daughter, there is a divine order in things. First, he said, I had to make known what my humanity did and suffered on the outside. That's ad extra. In order to be able to dispose souls to knowing what my divinity did on the inside ad intra. So we'd never get to the interior if we had not looked at the exterior. And that's why the church gave us the Stations of the Cross and gave us the mysteries of the Rosary to enable us to continuously meditate on the life, passion, death, and resurrection of Jesus, so that we would always keep it in mind, and therefore we would always keep the connection with Jesus alive. First, he said, I had to make known what my humanity did and suffered on the outside. So that's in the days of his incarnation. In order to be able to dispose souls to knowing what my divinity did on the inside ad intra. The creature is incapable of understanding my work altogether, as we know from studying these writings. I have been continuously teaching the writings of Luisa since 2011, and I am more and more convinced that I know nothing about them. Every time I go back, there's something new, something I haven't seen before, something I haven't registered before. And that's why I insist on everyone associated with me studying these writings all the time. The creature is incapable of understanding my work altogether. Therefore, I keep manifesting myself little by little, and that's what he does in our study of the writings as well. We only get it bit by bit, sip by sip. Then from your link, that's Luisa, from your link of connection with me, the other links will be connected. That means Luisa is linked to Jesus in this operation of the divine will, and we're linked to Luisa, to Jesus. But we're all linked together. So the image I would give you is of a group of people climbing a mountain, and they're all tied on to each other. And the leader is the one who goes ahead and tells the people closest to him, you can step there, it's safe enough. And then they can tell the people behind them, they can step up to the place where they were, and so on all down the mountain, and they all edge up the mountain together safely. Jesus said, from your link, Luisa, of connection with me, the other links of souls will be connected as well. That's us. And I will have crowds of souls who, living in the divine will redo all the acts of creatures. And I will have the glory of many suspended acts done only by me, also from creatures. And these from all classes, virgins, which will mean nuns, priests, lay people, according to their office. They will no longer operate humanly, but penetrating into my will, their acts will multiply for all in a fully divine manner. And I will have on the part of the creatures the divine glory of many sacraments received and administered in a human way, of others that are profaned, and others that are sullied with interest, and of many good works in which I remain more dishonoured than honoured. I so much long for this time. There's your Romans 8:19 again. Not only is creation longing for these souls, but the Lord said he was longing for them as well, his true children. And you, he said to Luisa, pray and long for it together with me. And do not move your link of connection from me as the first one. So Jesus is the great link, and then Luisa linked to him, and we all linked to him through Luisa. So February the 4th, 1919, the interior passion. So Luisa says, continue in my usual state. For about 3 days, I felt myself lost in God. So she's in constant ecstasy for 3 days. Many times good Jesus drew me inside of his most sacred humanity, and I swam in the immense sea of his divinity. So that's in the light. Oh, how many things could be seen, how clearly one could see everything that the divinity operated in the humanity of Jesus. And very often Jesus interrupted my surprises, telling her something. So the thing that he reveals to her now is that Jesus suffered the passion from the moment of conception. This is completely new. See, my daughter, with what excess of love I have loved the creature. Now that's Jeremiah 31:3. I have loved you with an everlasting love, and my love is constant. My divinity was jealous of entrusting to the creature the task of redemption, making me suffer the passion. The creature was impotent to make me die as many times for as many creatures as had come out and were to come out to the light of creation. And not only to die for every creature, but also to die for as many mortal sins as they would have the disgrace to commit. The divinity wanted a life for each life of the creature, and wanted a life for each death which by mortal sin the creature gave herself. That's some tall order. Who could be so powerful over me as to give me so many deaths, if not my divinity? Who could have had the strength, the love, the constancy to see me die so many times, if not my divinity? The creature would have grown tired and fallen short. And do not think that this crafting of my divinity started late, in other words, in the last couple of days of his life. But as soon as my conception was accomplished, even in the womb of my mother, who many times was aware of my pains and remained martyred, and she felt death together with me, the co-redemptrix. So, even from the maternal womb, my divinity took on the commitment of a loving executioner. But because loving, it was even more demanding and inflexible, so much so that my groaning humanity was spared not even one thorn, not one nail. But not like the thorns and the nails and the scourges I suffered in the passion which creatures gave me, and which did not multiply. As many as they inflicted, that's how many there were. Rather, those of my divinity multiplied at each offence, as many thorns for as many evil thoughts. Now, first of all, I want to give you Psalm 145:17. God only ever acts out of love. And if he demanded that Jesus, even in his infancy, even in his preborn state, would suffer this for us, then you're talking about a love that's completely incomprehensible to us. And if Jesus would agree, it's also incomprehensible love to us. So I want to give you Psalm 51, verses 5 and 6 as well. So Jesus said he had as many thorns, deaths for as many thorns, and so on, for the many unworthy works. He said, I had as many blows for as many pleasures, as many pains for as much diversity of offences. Therefore, he said, there were seas of pains, innumerable thorns, nails, and blows. It's inconceivable to us. In the face of the passion which the divinity gave to me, and Luisa brings this out in the hours of the passion, in the agony of Jesus in the garden, the different levels of passion, the passion of love, the passion of sin, and then the passion that was given to him by the people. In the face of the passion which the divinity gave me, the passion which creatures gave me on the last of my days was nothing but a shadow. It was only the image of what my divinity made me suffer during the whole course of my life. This is why I love souls so much, because they cost me so much. They are those pains that are inconceivable to the created mind, which I agree. Therefore, enter into my divinity and see and touch with your own hand what I suffered. So I want to give you Hebrews 10:28 there. And in the next paragraph, we're going to be talking about the throne of justice that was there for each creature. So why would Jesus suffer? And before I even read, I want to give you 2 Corinthians 5, verses 14 and 15. I want to give you 1 Corinthians 15:3 and Romans 5:8. I don't know, Luisa said. I found myself inside the divine immensity as it erected the throne of justice for each creature, to which my sweet Jesus had to answer for each act of the creature. I honestly think that nobody could explain this to you. You really need to take it before the throne of God and ask for enlightenment, because when we grasp it, we're going to change drastically. Jesus had to suffer for each act of the creature, suffer their pains, their death, and pay the penalty for everything. That was the thing that St. Paul said. He died for me. He gave his life for me. He suffered those scourges for me. He was crowned for me. He was nailed for me. He gave his forgiveness on the cross for me. He showed me how to surrender to God from the cross. I could go on, but I'm just giving you a hint as to how to deal with it. Jesus was like a sweet little lamb killed by divine hands to rise again and suffer even more deaths. Oh God, she said, what harrowing pains. To die in order to rise again, and to rise again in order to submit to a more harrowing death. I felt myself dying in seeing my sweet Jesus being killed so many times. I would have wanted to spare the one who loves me so much even just one death. Oh, how well I understood that only the divinity could make my sweet Jesus suffer so much, and could boast of having loved men to folly and to excess. Therefore, we've absolutely no excuse before the divine judgment, none whatsoever, because everything has been paid for us. And I've often imagined Jesus saying to a soul that is condemning itself to hell, did I not pay enough for you? Did I not suffer enough? Did I not love you enough? When his pains and his suffering and his love are all infinite and beyond imagination. So Luisa said, how well I understood that only the divinity could make my Jesus suffer so much and could boast of having loved men to folly and to excess. So I want to give you John 15:9 and Jeremiah 31:3. I've loved you with an everlasting love, and I'm constant in my affection for you. Neither angel nor man had this power in hand of being able to love us with such great heroism and sacrifice as only our incarnate God had. But who can say everything? My poor mind swam in the immense sea of light, of love, and of pain, and I remained as though drowned without being able to get out. And if my beloved Jesus had not drawn me into the little sea of his most holy humanity, in which my mind was not so immersed, without being able to see the boundary, I couldn't have said a thing. So first of all, Luisa is absolutely swimming in the immensity of the divinity, and then she's drawn into the much smaller space of Jesus' humanity, which of course by comparison with the divinity is small. Can you imagine how small we are if he's small in comparison with the divinity? And she said if this hadn't happened, she couldn't have said anything at all. So Jesus said, "Beloved daughter, birthed from my life, come into my will. Come and see how much there is to substitute for so many acts of mine still suspended, not yet substituted for by creatures." I want to give you John 1, verses 3 to 4, and Colossians 1:24. So in this paragraph, the Lord is going to tell us that our mission is great, and it's also fully divine. My will, he said, must be in you as the first wheel of the clock. Now he's thinking of what we would call a Swiss watch. So you've got the main wheel and you've got the smaller wheels. If the divine will moves, all the other wheels move, and the clock signals the hours and the minutes. So all the accord is in the motion of the first wheel, because God is always the prime mover. And if this first wheel has no motion, the clock is stopped. It's a strange thing that if you actually go to the book of Exodus, at the very end of it, in I think it's chapter 40 or 45, I can't remember, it's the very end of the book of Exodus, you're told that when the people were going through the desert, they couldn't make the journey at all unless the cloud which was guiding them rose from the camp and moved forward. And wherever the cloud moved to, they moved. And if the cloud didn't move, they stopped, they stayed. And so only if God moves first can we move. Otherwise, we can do nothing. John 15:5, without me, you can do nothing. So all the accord is in the motion of the first wheel. And if this first wheel has no motion, the clock is stopped. In the same way, the first wheel in you must be my will, and must give motion to all your thoughts. At 2 Corinthians 10:5, all our thoughts must be captivated and given to Christ. The first wheel in you must be my will, which must give motion to your thoughts, your heart, your desires, and to everything. And since my will is the central wheel of my being, of creation, and of everything, your motion coming out from this center will come to substitute for the many acts of souls, and multiplying in the motions of all as the central motion, it will come to lay before my throne on their behalf the acts of creatures substituting for everything. Therefore be attentive. Your mission is great, and it's fully divine. We can do everything in him. We can do nothing outside of him. So that's Philippians 4:13. I can do all things in Christ who gives me the strength. And John 15:5, without me, you can do nothing. We leave it there.